Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we are back. We are live. And this is one show today that I have very much been looking forward to because this is a follow up on an earlier show that we done last month. And you may have been there to hear it at the time, maybe you weren't, but it was the Forgotten Exodus, the Into Africa theory of human evolution. And I had with me author and researcher Bruce Fenton and archaeologist Jessica Knigge, who's all the way down under. And we had such fun the first time that I shamelessly got the two of them back, and we're going to do it all again, and we're going to build on that foundation. And you don't necessarily have to have seen or heard the first show, but if you want to find that, head on over to the TFR archive, or you can find it on the YouTube channel as well. But for anyone who hasn't heard of tonight's guests, let me just catch you up, because you're in for a real special treat here, folks. You truly are. First up, we have got Bruce Fenton, and he is an independent British scientific researcher born in the historic English town of Cheltenham, England. And he spent his formative years at a local boys' grammar school before studying English literature at a local college. Now, he finished his general education at Anglia Ruskin University, where he graduated from his studies of information systems in 2003. Now, he then spent 5 years living in Ecuador after being in Australia. And in Ecuador, he was carrying out direct investigations at an anomalous megalithic construction discovered in the Amazon jungle. Now, he has spent the last 20 years researching the many mysteries of the ancient world, and his interests have since taken him to archaeological sites spread across all 6 habitable continents. Now, he considers himself to be an independent archaeological researcher and an amateur paleoanthropologist. Now, Bruce has earned the respect of his peers and made a name for himself in his research fields. His research activities in Ecuador have featured in the UK's Telegraph newspaper, and he has recently led a research expedition into the Caucasus Mountains for a popular science show, also acting as a guest presenter. And Bruce is the author of a great many online articles and is a regular guest on a great many internet radio shows. And invitations for him to speak are always on his desk, and no wonder. Now, Bruce is also a member of the Paleo Anthropology Society and the Scientific and Medical Network. And we also have one of our very own joining us tonight as well, Jessica Knigge. Now, Jessica has been on the show. This is her 3rd visit now, and she's an archaeologist from all the way down under. So without any further ado, let me bring everyone onto the show. Guys, how are you all doing?
Great, thanks,
Well,
Kev.
yeah, pretty well.
No.
Yeah, sorry about the long, long list of things. I'll have to shorten that down for you next time.
I don't know. Now I'm getting feedback from somebody. I think somebody's headphones are speakers are too loud or something. Maybe.
Okay.
1 2 1 2. No, still getting it.
Still getting it.
Yeah. 1 2.
I don't think it's fine.
That's it. Fine. That's it. Whatever it is, don't touch anything. Don't touch. Oh no. So
I'll try moving away from the computer a bit.
It's almost as if the. No, that's it. It's fine. It's perfect now. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. So last time we got together, guys, I think we built a very solid foundation for getting into some of these ancient mysteries, taking a look at some of these megalithic sites, taking a look at some of the world's wonders as well, and having a real conversation and following this path, following that human story. You know, last time with the whole Into Africa theory, really blew a lot of people's minds, and I know that from some of the comments that were left, some of the mail that I got. So we're going to be talking today about things like the pyramids, we're going to get into Gobekli Tepe, and we're even going to get into the potential for human hybridization programs in the very distant past. So I don't know where we want to pick this up today, guys, but welcome to the show again. I hope you're all safe and well. Hope you're enjoying lockdown mode.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's it's peculiar, isn't it? It's novel.
It's definitely something we've never ever been through before, Bruce. Right?
No, it's I mean, I guess some of the people that maybe remember little elements of the Second World War, you know, some of the older people might find bits of it familiar, but I think for the rest of us, yeah, it's a very novel situation, isn't it?
And how's things down under, Jess? Because a lot of the time, we've kind of the media forget to tell us what's going on all the way down under. So tell us, how is Australia?
Yeah, pretty much the same as the rest of the world, Kev. As we were talking about before the show, a lot of businesses have been shut, and as Bruce was mentioning, it's the small businesses that suffer, and that's certainly what we're seeing here. And just massive lines at Centrelink for government help and things like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of anxiety happening here, but you know, some of us are seeing it as an opportunity to slow down a little bit. And I certainly am looking at it that way because my life was pretty hectic and fast paced. So I'm enjoying just time to slow down and spend with the family, and I'm sure things will be all right eventually.
Yeah, and Bruce, of course, we got our sternly worded warning from Boris Johnson the other night. Put us right in our place, didn't it?
That's right, yeah. We've been told off now, get to your room and stay there until I say you can come out.
Yeah, any more of that naughty behaviour and we'll be getting 6 of the best from Bojo. Yeah. So, guys, now, Jess, let me come to you first, okay? Because last time we were talking about the movement of, or potentially the movement of people from Australia through Asia down into Africa. And I want to pick up the whole Australian thing today because we're going to be touching on Gobekli Tepe as well. Now, we're going to be all over the place on this broadcast because you know how my mind works. That's how things flow. We'll just take the conversation where it goes. I was watching just a short video just the other day, and it was intriguing. It really was, because it was showing how some of the symbology, some of the things that you see associated with Aboriginal people, the same kind of logos, the same kind of things were turning up on the actual monuments in Gobekli Tepe. Now, that's a bit bizarre for me, but I'll come to you and ask you for your thoughts on that, because I know you look into both aspects. You've got an interest in Gobekli Tepe, and obviously, you know, the Aboriginal thing you're very clued up on. So what do you make of that?
All right, so that's actually Bruce's theory. So I'll let him discuss that because he's the progenitor of that one, and I'm pretty sure he's the one that picked that up as well, if I'm correct. But yeah, as
somebody
people may or may not be aware.
Somebody stole it from Bruce, because it certainly didn't give Bruce any credit for it.
I think I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. And they took that directly from Bruce's article in New Dawn magazine, I think. But so Gobekli Tepe is a pre-pottery Neolithic site in southern Turkey. It's on a limestone plateau. It's dated to about 12,000 years ago. And it's got dozens of these 20 to 60 tonne limestone T-shaped pillars, and they're in the form of circles, enclosures, and in the middle you've got 2 massive of these T-shaped pillars, and they're humanoid in shape as well and depiction. And basically there's quite a few of these enclosures, and they all seem to have been systematically buried after they've been built, sort of thing, and then other ones have been built on top of it and around them. And they're full of all these reliefs where they've got animal depictions and insects and humans and all sorts of symbols. and they're in high relief. So the rest of the rock's actually been cut away from the design, as you can see in those photos there, which is significantly harder to do than etching petroglyphs. So archaeology has no idea
So
what
Jess,
this
when
site is.
you were describing that there, this is actually one block of stone then, and
Yes.
then they actually take the rest of the stone off as opposed to etching it on to just that's another level
Correct,
altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, so they actually tried to replicate this, and it took 300 hours just to do one of these stone blocks. So it's a lot of that's a lot of time spent for something that seemingly, we have no idea what it was used for. And only 10% of the site has actually been excavated at this point. And the mainstream science has no idea what they were used for. They know what it wasn't. They know that it wasn't a burial site. It wasn't a settlement. There was no agriculture indicated in the area, and only wild animal bones were found in the area. So pretty enigmatic. And there are a few theories from the alternative sector. And that is, there's the theory of a biblical connection. An author in 2014 brought out a book called, Andrew Collins brought out a book called Gobekli Tepe, The Genesis of the Gods. And he actually connects it to, it is in the area of Abraham and Noah. So there's the theory that it could be like an inventory of animals that were rescued. There's the theory that the massive pillars in the middle have been tracked to see where they're facing celestially. And it seems Andrew Collins found that 11,500 years ago, the oldest and most impressive enclosure D, was shown to be tracking the brightest star, Danek, in the constellation Cygnus. And there's a northwest, southeast general direction that these pillars face, but there were slight changes with each enclosure. And when he actually had a look and tracked the movement of this star, he found that that's actually what these pillars were tracking. And when we look at different ancient mythologies, we see that Cygnus is quite prevalent. There's a Persian god that comes from Cygnus. There's the Egyptian goddess Nuit, the goddess of the night sky, and there's also the Mayan sun god Kinich, who also comes from Cygnus. So that's just an interesting theory. I definitely recommend reading that book. And there are others, theories such as Graham Hancock's theory of a comet possibly hitting Earth and, pillar 46, I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he thinks depicts a snapshot of the sky at the time of this comet bombardment. And he thinks that the animals are actually depicting constellations. So him and Robert Schoch and Andrew Collins are all in agreement there's some form of astronomical clock element at play with Gobekli Tepe, which is not surprising, seeing as most megalithic structures have some form of astronomical significance. So
that's what gets
those
me,
are the
Jess.
theories
that really...
I have researched myself. But Bruce's theory is, very interesting, and I'll let him tell you his theory and how it connects into Australia.
And just before I get there, that's one of the things that really gets me all the time, this obsession that ancient people had with the night sky. And that's a heck of an undertaking that went underway at Gobekli Tepe. When you look at it from a kind of construction project, the scale of it, it's absolutely massive. It doesn't look like it was done, in my opinion anyway, for something, you know, for a comet coming in. I mean, that suggests, I mean, how much warning do you get of a comet coming in? And then
well, I mean, jumping around a little bit here to the pyramid and things, you know, some people believe that these people did know that these cataclysms were coming, and that some of these megalithic structures were actually a way of warning or a way of showing that they had the knowledge that the cyclical cataclysms occur. And so, I mean, I don't know, but it could, you know, they could have known and they could have been, we just don't know.
That's the thing. We always come back to, Jess, isn't it? We just don't know. So, Bruce, let me come to you then, and let me ask you about Gobekli Tepe. And I do apologise that I gave somebody else, well, I didn't give them credit for your theory, but it annoys me, it irks me when I see that happening on YouTube, people almost stealing it as their own, not giving credit. But talk to me about Gobekli Tepe then. I mean, you first came across it, your first thoughts of it. Talk to us, Bruce. You're muted up, I think, yes.
Yeah, just to very quickly say as well that the video in question, the guy has now said he will add credit. I did speak to him. That's and he sort of apologised and said he will do it. So that's good, because as you know, not everyone does. Some
no, they definitely don't.
You.
No, I mean, as a host, I always give credit, and maybe to the point of being ad nauseum, always tell people where I get it from, because it's only fair, you know, and it's information. And you know, so talk to us and give us the full version, not the kind of cliff notes that he put together.
Sure. Yeah, what it was really like, I'm trying to think how I first noticed this, but I was obviously working on the recent out of Africa theory. So I mean, look, I'd spent quite a bit of time looking into prehistoric Australia and, you know, island Southeast Asia, the sort of the Oceanian region, which to be honest, in terms of, let's say, independent or fringe alternative history research, it's a really quite ignored continent. Most people are looking at Egypt, they're looking at all the big places, Samaria, you know, and whatnot. We know that there's particular areas where there's a lot of archaeology. You know, you've got loads of Mayan temples, you've got loads of Aztec. So that's where most of the focus goes, because when you go to Australia, there is not as many obvious major structures, right? And so because you don't have an equivalent of the Great Pyramid or something, you know, it hasn't really had the same level of attention, right, that other areas had. And I'm guilty of the fact that I hadn't really looked that intensely at prehistoric Australia previous to the out of Australia research. And I started to find out that, in fact, there were early mounds, that you do have some stone circles. That in fact, we consider what may be the earliest stone circle, the earliest sort of astronomical circle in the world is actually in Australia, right? Which a lot of people wouldn't know. And then on top of that,
sorry to interrupt. Can I just interject here? Just wanted to add something to that. I spoke to Anne-Marie again yesterday, who's Luna from the chat, and she's an original Australian. And she told me that her and her husband remember years and years and years ago that there was actually a pyramid found in the Snowy Mountains here. And it was 12 feet high and made of granite, solid granite. And it was actually made the news, the mainstream news at the time. But she reckons that since then, nothing's been said about it whatsoever, and it's just completely disappeared from the record. And probably before a time you could find an archive of that news story as well. And also there's obviously the Gympie Pyramid as well. And I've spoken to a few people that live in that area about that, and I'm interested in having a look at some of the artefacts that the local people have and have found around the Gympie Pyramid. So I just wanted to add that to what Bruce was saying. I just thought that was a good time to add that. But on you go, Bruce, sorry.
And can I just add that is such a...
People need to know that really a whole rethink of the Australasian continent is required, right? Because there are, the point I get to it is that, there are these sites, and as you've said, there are sites, they're just not very well known. And elsewhere, the sites were deliberately destroyed. You know, as the Europeans came in, they wanted to farm, you know, an Aboriginal sacred site on a farmland, you know, wouldn't have been revered and respected. It was much more likely to get smashed to bits, right? So if you had a stone circle there, it would have, like these Bora rings and stuff that there used to be. A lot of them were smashed up. Stone is used in roads or walls for farms, right? So the problem is you lose most of that, and then it looks like there's not a lot of work that's been done, right? So that's created a kind of like a false sense of a lack, right? Which is not really reflecting reality. And in fact, just a couple of years back, they found some of the earliest stone housing in the world on an island off the west coast, I believe, in Australia. They found there's some foundations of what would have been, you know, basically stone houses. Now, that doesn't fit the narrative of purely hunter-gatherer societies who never stayed anywhere in a long place, never did any kind of, you know, tending gardens and raising animals and all the rest of it. If you've got a permanent fixture like a stone house, there's a good chance you're also probably cultivating some sort of plants or, you know, do something like that. So things that we've always, in the mainstream have generally been assumed to never have happened anywhere on the continent, have happened in places. And elsewhere, we do have mounds and you do have stone circles and you do have all of this, right? It just hasn't become very well known. Now, as I became more aware of this, you know, I kind of stumbled on some of these connections with, particularly with Gobekli Tepe, but also elsewhere, Egypt and whatnot, where it turns out that on some of the stones, particularly, let's say, Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe, which is the most well known of these structures. Now, the reason for that is because it's being linked to the idea of the comet impact, that anyone who is familiar with kind of Graham Hancock's work, not just his, but in a lot of the major newspapers have covered a couple of different researchers that have suggested that there was this impact. Obviously, Andrew Collins as well. And I think there's a UK scientist who's also kind of linked it into an astronomical events, right? Now, if you look at it, yeah, okay, you've got like the birds, and you can see that you've got something called the vulture or bird of prey of some sort, with this ball. And then you've also got the free bags with the little animals next to them and all this. So this has been kind of interpreted as to do with the comet impact. Now, I'm not going to say that it has no connection to that, but that's not my field. What I've found is that on there you have direct connections to some lore stories from up in Arnhem Land and up in the north, which again, you know, is particularly fundamental to this story, is really the Northern Territories area and Arnhem Land and that area. I'm not linking everything to all around Australia. You've got a lot of different nations, but what I found is a connection to that region, because you have here, what I'm given to understand is a imagery of Emu Lady and the Forbidden Fruit. Now, I've seen this artwork painted on rock up in Arnhem Land. I've not personally been there, but I've been supplied images. And you've got the bird even looking in the same direction with the ball in the same position. The whole lot there, that image replicated. And I was informed that that is actually part of the story of Emu Lady and the Forbidden Fruit. And then also you have above there, you'll see these 3 bags, and each one has a small animal above it. Now, you don't often see those interpreted by people, right? But I'll give you one potential interpretation, because what I found is that you have a very, very old story of the basically creation mother, who is an aspect of the rainbow serpent, and that she brings people, culture, language in bags and distributes them around the continent, right? And so each bag is connected to, you know, a nation's totem spirits, right? So, as most people know, that usually entails an animal, right? And so you look above each one of those bags and you've got a little animal there. Now, what I say they're telling us is those are 3 different tribes of the time, and they have taken part in this construction, or they are part of the story we're seeing there. And so they've been marked by a bag and an animal each. So we know there's 3 different groups there, they're represented. We also have beneath them that story, again, of your Emu Lady and the Forbidden Fruit. We have representations there of, I think there's of another animal on there potentially, that at the bottom we have what looks like potentially a type of emu or large long-necked bird as well, which there's a bird that's now extinct in Australia. I've forgotten the name now. Sorry?
Genyornis Newtoni, yeah.
Yeah, that looks very, very similar to this, and you know, they have this very large flightless bird that was a bit like an emu. And so there's a few aspects on there. Now, I'm not saying that some of these other formations, like the scorpion and you know, and these other birds, they're not star systems. They may well be. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think they probably are early representations of constellations. But I think we have a mixture of stories here, and I don't necessarily think it's about a comet. I'm not convinced. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm not personally convinced. I think that what we need to do
Bruce.
is...
Hold that thought. We're right on the break. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey,
we will
everyone,
be
it's
right back.
Gio, founder of True Free.
There we go. Now, we're still on YouTube, guys. We're still on YouTube. So, Bruce, let people know where they can check out your website, follow you, things like that.
Sure. If people would like to dive into this, they'll find an article about it on my website, ancientnews.net, and a lot of different archaeological stories on there. And at the moment, my other main site is hybridhumans.net, and there's a few articles on there, I think just 5 or 6. Also on Twitter, they can find me at exogenesishh, and follow me there, and I usually respond to people if they have a question for me or anything like that. Also on Facebook as well, and there's a page for me and a page for the book, the new Exogenesis book. So appreciate anyone giving that a like and following that for updates.
And Jess, we're going to need to get you a website at this rate. If you keep coming on this show, we're going to have to get you your own website.
I know, I've got plenty of time to get on that now, so.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's very, very strange times, like we said at the start of the show, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in today, for taking the time. I know we've all got a lot more time on our hands now, but we really do appreciate you being here, hanging out. You know, this is what I call the really good woo. And I mean, starting off with Gobekli Tepe, we haven't even got going yet because we're told to go back to Bruce after the break and get into more of that. But we can go from there to the pyramids, to South America, to anywhere the guys want to go, because it's going to be one of these free-flowing conversations. You know how I roll on KBS, folks. It's unscripted. It's all thrown together at the last minute, but I think that's what kind of makes it work. And Bruce, I was lost in your hybrid human website today after you sent me a link to that. That's the kind of stuff that I love to get into. And I've seen you had touched on Ceres as well, that planet Ceres, so we can get into that later on in the broadcast. Jess will know that I am a big lover of all information on ancient aliens, nowadays aliens, planet. Oh, it's all up my street, dude. It really is. And I'll be getting my book soon as well, right? Finally got my book order in. Yes, looking forward to getting that. And when I get it, I'll certainly be doing a quick review video on here, and I'll be leaving you a good review as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess the post's running, I think, fairly normally, isn't it? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
So far.
If not, they've got drones, I'm sure. Boris will have it under control, Bruce. I mean, who else would you want to lead us through a crisis like this than Boris Johnson, right?
Well, yeah.
It's the blind leading the blind down there in Westminster, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Now, let me check the time. Yeah, hopefully it's not too long, but I don't see things changing for the foreseeable future, that's for sure.
No, look, I mean, the issues behind this, and I think it'll drag out, and obviously the repercussions are going to drag out. I think if anyone thinks it's going to be normal in a couple of weeks, which I think a lot of people are thinking, it's like, no. It's not going to be normal in a couple of weeks.
No.
Well, our government's basically said 6 months that all our pubs and restaurants and that will be shut for. So, you know, that's quite an extended period when you think about it.
Here we go.
I don't think any of us thought that it would go for that long.
Here we go.
Yeah, I think they're worried that
Here we go, guys.
is
Here we go.
June, July.
Here we go.
Yeah.
2 seconds. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into today's Kev Baker Show with our special guests, author, researcher Bruce Fenton, and we've got archaeologist Jessica Knigge joining us from all the way down under. One of my favourite countries, yes, indeed. And today we're getting into all the good stuff. Gobekli Tepe, ancient technology, the pyramids, all the stuff over in South America, you name it. We're even getting into human hybridization programs later on in the show. So let me go back to Bruce right now, because we were getting into Gobekli Tepe. And you know, that image that we were looking at, these bags that you were talking about, they turn up all over the world, right, Bruce? I mean, they are quite a common kind of depiction. And you're saying then that this represents a nation's or a maybe a continent's kind of totems, is that right?
Basically, tribal groups.
Yeah.
So, you know, each or people, like you put out your place, tribe, people, nation, population. I mean, you know, depending on how you want to view that. I mean, if you go back though to the period we're talking about, I think it wouldn't be wrong to say tribal groups is the most likely, rather than necessarily nations. We don't know that there was, you know, founded nations. I mean, what would we consider?
They didn't have lines on
more
maps
like
back then,
if
right?
you think of Native Americans with their totem animals in their tribal groups as well. I mean, again, you're thinking in those kind of lines here, right? Now, and a lot of, I mean, in terms of, you know, look, I'm not initiated or anything in any of the sort of original nations of Australia, but, you know, in many of them, there is an attachment to a spirit animal, right, for you personally or within your group, your family, depending on which nation that you're talking about. Now, there's so many, I cannot possibly speak in general terms here and say that, you know, it's all, because it won't be. But this is a, you know, there's a deep history of association between humans and an animal spirit or an animal totem, right? Now, if you look at those flags, you look at this history that's there, you realize that, you know, what we're being shown really is the animal spirit. And the bags, as you say, they found these in Sumeria, they're in artwork in parts of North America, Native American artwork has the bags. They're kind of a universal theme, and they're quite a buzz topic. You'll find in alternative archaeology, particularly, people are often speculating, what are these bags for? You know, what are the bags about, particularly the Sumerian ones. Now, nobody seems to be very aware that the oldest, you know, artwork representing these is down in, you know, in Australia. It's not in Sumeria. It's not a Gobekli Tepe. And so when you're trying to understand a mystery, I always say go to the oldest source.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Don't start 2,000 years ago or something in the Middle East. You know, go back to 20,000 years ago in Northern Australia, and you'll find, you know, there's the lore stories going all the way back. They probably go back longer than that, but we can only deal with where the artwork has been dated, right? I mean, I would suggest it goes back way, way longer than that. But we have the story of this lady who's connected with the sea, you know, who's connected with the rainbow serpent, whose head is often depicted as a yam leaf, and she's very much connected with the yam, right? And we find that a yam leaf-headed entity is portrayed at Gobekli Tepe. In fact, it's the only female you know, entity represented on any of the stones. That we only have it once. We have this woman, and the position she's in, the pose she's in, is absolutely a match for that of this entity in Northern Australia. Who I'm trying to remember. I got the name. Yeah,
Yingana.
Thank you. Yeah, Yingana, and that you have her in the same pose as we see, you know, in rock art there, that you see at Gobekli Tepe. Now, to me, that's just stunning, you know. And then you've got the overlap of the portrayal of the unusual head, this yam leaf type head, and the bags, you know, the many bags which are to be distributed across the lands. Now, one can't help but wonder, is this the distributing across the land after the cataclysm, perhaps? You know, the reseeding of humanity, where there are different peoples being distributed to different lands, you know, a kind of reboot? Or is it really an older creation myth going right back to the beginning of humans? Now, I don't know for sure, but it could be both. Again, if you're dealing with cyclical narratives, things tend to repeat. And when you're not stuck in linear time, but dealing with cyclical time, you know, the past, the present, the future, they kind of blend into a seamless circle. So it may well be that this, you know, this narrative is in touch with both the very ancient and the more recent, you know, events, quite possibly.
I've always, I mean, this might be right out there, but I've always kind of thought about the bags being associated with, because there's always different animals depicted and things, Bruce, like the different DNA almost, perhaps, containers for that information for these animals. I know that might sound a bit right out there, but That's the kind of association I've always had with the bags in my own head.
Well, I don't think that's totally wrong. Because what I think was going on, at least in the very early part of the story, is different. I mean, remember, there's a lot of marriage law that's to be thought of here. A lot of interbreeding, a lot of breeding customs and law on who you can marry, who you can breed with. There's a lot of that associated here. Now, one way of working out who you can be with is the animal associations, right? That's one part of that. Now, I think that if we go back far enough, that when the first people were, now, obviously we'll touch on this more later, but when the first people were being created by the creation spirits, that the creation spirits, these beings, associated groups, identities. Now, like, for example, that these will be the crocodile people, these will be the snake people, and that they can't mix with each other because of DNA issues, or because of certain traits that are wanted, that you want certain groups to mix with other groups and not with others, right? And these spirits wanted that. And one way to bring that about is to associate them with an easy to remember code that says, okay, well, you shouldn't really marry that group. You should marry that group, right? So I suspect that there is a link there with the DNA and with an easy way of remembering, that you're in some way connected to that person, but not to that one, and all the rest of it. I know that there's far more complex than that. And as I said in our last chat, I don't like to delve much into the marriage law. It's outside my field. I know it's very complex.
Very complicated.
Yeah,
I've studied a bit of it in Arnhem Land, and it's the most complex social structure on Earth.
Exactly.
And that's coming from my professor. So she wrote a book on it, actually. On
so
the,
they know.
The social system.
Yeah, I don't delve into it too much. Also, I know that I'm not initiated, I'm not learned in the law. So for me to sit and say how the marriage law works would be me making myself look like an idiot to every Indigenous person in Australia, right?
Good man. We don't want that.
Just wanted to add quickly something. I'm not sure if you're aware, Bruce, but in 2010 at Gobekli Tepe, they found a totem pole which depicts, it's got a human baby down the bottom, and it's got two figures above it, and each figure is holding the one underneath it. And the two top figures have actually been defaced. And when you sort of look at it, to interpret it, you'd think that it would, it looks like a family or like a sort of progression maybe. And it'd be interesting to know what was defaced, what they didn't want us to sort of know. What was it that led to the human baby, the two above it. So I wasn't sure whether you were aware of that one or not.
I've seen it. Yeah, I think I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we get that defacing element, because again, you see that a lot in Egypt, deliberate defacing of, of particularly important people, where they've been later on had, parts like the nose or whatever chipped off deliberately, and like why people are obscured sometimes from being seen later, which is kind of funny, isn't it? What's going on there? Is there something about them that we're not supposed to see? Which is it's quite intriguing, really. But also the totem pole. I know that's another interesting, because most people you hear of like the totem pole and think of Native America, but you also have a very similar sacred artifacts that are in parts of Central Australia. And I didn't know that for a long time. That in fact, I would suggest, again, the totem pole that we think of is most likely it was brought out of Australia during the migrations, and the history of creating the totem pole, the equivalent, goes back to, I'm pretty sure it's the Central North, and in that maybe to the Rente and some of that, the area around Uluru and to the north, that there's a tradition there of it. The same areas which have the traditions of the Tringas and whatnot, that they actually do have those. So that's another funny element. So when you think about it, you say, well, you've got a totem pole there. Who uses those? Well, we know the Native Americans do, but we also know that some of the original nations also do. So that's another little funny link there. You have a Gobekli Tepe, and each time you see one of these, it makes you have to think, well, that's intriguing to have yet.
Colombia, Italy. Yeah, so it's indicative of this global culture as well. So
Absolutely.
Just wondered if you knew much about that.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well, that you've got them, right across from all the way up to, like you said, through Indonesia to the Americas, that same positioning of the hands, folded across even sort of the belly, and other elements, that overlap. The nose often as well, you've got this particular, like the Easter Island type nose. I mean, that features on some of the statues and stuff at Gobekli Tepe and elsewhere as well, that I think in Indonesia as well. So there's other elements that you find that are very much global. Now, where does that begin? I mean, look, for me, I'm not particularly saying that this lost civilization was centered on the Australasian continent. What I now suspect, I mean, I did initially say that in my first article on this topic, and that's what's been picked up by other people in videos and stuff. But look, I would actually modify that. What I think is that we had a civilization that was spread across island Southeast Asia, right across to northern territories and to what would be now Papua, but conversely also to mainland Southeast Asia. And I think that we had a maritime culture that was spread right across. Now, so of course, because it's maritime culture, it was in contact with the people of the northern territories, right? But it was centered on the islands, and in parts of it were on what is now obviously Southeast Asia, the coastlines of, Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And I think that we had there, it was a kind of, they still would have been, very close genetically, pretty much the same, original people, right? But just a slightly separate population. But they had a different kind of culture because they were, seafaring. They spent a lot of their time, they were doing deep sea fishing, trading between islands. And obviously that shapes a culture, right? And that changes the technologies, the needs you have, and also pushes you into the more development of engineering and stuff. Because obviously boat design and then moving to a ship design, you start having to use different technologies that you wouldn't use if you're rooted on the land, right? So I think that's where we start to have an acceleration in the use of engineering and technologies in that region that we don't see as much across the main continent itself. But there is contact. And that's why we have the people up in the north. They remember these people. They remember the law. They have the same symbols. They were in contact. They were kind of, the edges of that civilization, that they knew them. They would have traded with them. And so they're not necessarily where that symbolism, all came from, but they were in contact. So there was a shared knowledge, a shared wisdom. Now, what I feel happened is that as the sea levels rose around 13,000 years ago, that a lot of that land was flooded, and that these people had boats and ships, right? And they started to move out, and that we have them moving across to, first just like southern India. There's the remains of a large port off the coast of southern India, which Graham Hancock has dove on. People will know his work, will know that many years ago he dived down onto megalithic ruins off the coast of the tip of southern India, that date back to about 12. They would have been above the sea level 12,000 years ago. I believe that is a port of that same civilization that has now been lost to the sea. They would have been able to migrate via that route onwards up to Mesopotamia, up to into the Middle East, because you've got, of course, the Euphrates and the Tigris. You can move all the way up, right? So if these people had been already a maritime culture, exploring, trading, sailing quite long distances, they eventually began to move to areas that they felt they could restart their culture, restart their civilization.
So
now,
Bruce,
we know that the Fertile Crescent is one of those.
This missing civilization, I mean, would this be unfair to associate that with the Atlanteans? Because for me, Atlantis hasn't just been a place; it's more been a global kind of structure, a thing, spread around the world. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here? Then, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably the true seed of the Atlantis story, because like with a lot of that kind of lore, what happens is it gets, I don't know if appropriated's the right word, but the way to keep something going is often to personalize it, right? So isn't it funny the way that when Solon shares, this story, that, it becomes, the story of Atlantis starts to involve the Greeks, And we start getting this story that, in those times, the Greeks fought against the Atlanteans and all this stuff, and they become involved in the story. And a lot of people have taken that as kind of as gospel. But I think what you have there is, if your civilization is involved in the story, you're more likely to keep it. You're more likely to value it, right? So suddenly Atlantis is in the Mediterranean and the Greeks were somehow connected to it. But we know that the Greek civilization did not exist 12,000 years ago, right? It didn't. So there was no Greeks involved in this. But the same as the Egyptians may well have remembered it as, well, they were the forefathers of the Egyptian nation. Look, because everyone wants themselves in the story, and that's how you remember it. Because if you say some far off land had this thing, and people, why do I care about some far off land and some distant time? That's nothing to do with me. But if you say, well, no, we were involved and these are our ancestors, this is our law, the story remains. And I think that's where too many people have become literalists. They think, well, this must be in the Mediterranean. It must be connected to Athens, and all this stuff. And I think that, no, that's not the way it works. Because
it's probably all got a bit of truth to it, like if it was a global civilization, then you are going to have the involvement of a lot of these places to some degree.
Yeah. Which is not the civilizations. Because, when we think of what we think of the ancient Greeks, obviously that was not a civilization present 12,000 years ago. So, yes, there would have been people in that region that would have been part of the global civilization. But yeah, the idea of like Athens fighting against the Atlanteans, to me is, that's them putting themselves in the story, which I can understand for, their own reasons that you want to be associated, right? So if you start to look at it that way, you realize that, hang on a minute, it's not that it's a fabricated story, it's a true story that they've added to. And I expect the Egyptians probably added a bit to it as well. And, everyone personalised it. If you trace it back, I think it goes back down that way.
If we go to Egypt then, because it's not exactly a stone's throw away from Gobekli Tepe, we're given an age of the pyramids that personally, and I've got no training in this kind of thing, but I don't think they're like 4,000 years old, the given story that we're told. I think they're far older. And do they tie in with Gobekli Tepe at all then? I'll ask you first, Bruce, and then you can have a go at that, Jess, okay?
Yeah. In my understanding, I think that what we have there, some parts of the Giza Plateau site are much older, including the bases for the pyramids and also the Sphinx and the Sphinx temples. I think all of those may go back to 12,000 years, right? But I think the majority of the stone for the pyramids, is being stacked up more recently, but it's more like a repair job. I think that what we have is there's basically the main buildings are already there, and that they have probably been destroyed largely in the cataclysm, and that now we have later people that are coming, building them up again, restoring that area to glory. But that some of these areas, underneath the pyramids, you've got like the Queen's Chamber and stuff. I think the Queen's Chamber is much older, 12,000 years old, the same as the Sphinx. So I think that the problem you have, if you take it as when did the last stone go on the top of the pyramid or something, probably maybe it is 5,000. When was the base there? Then I think you're going to 12,000.
Jess, what about you? What do you your idea on the pyramids?
Well, the official story, the official narrative, which is defended to the death by Egyptologists even today, I think most rational people would view it as pretty ridiculous, being that it was supposed to have been built within a 20-year period during Cheops's reign as a tomb for him. And so basically that would mean that 2.5 million stone blocks weighing several tons each, over 20 years, that would mean that one would have to be quarried, cut and set into place every 2.5 minutes, which when you're talking they didn't have machinery or anything like that. It's mind-boggling to try and wrap your head around that being the official narrative, especially when you look at the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, and that took 150 years. They freely admit that. So they want this narrative that it was a tomb, and if it took longer than 20 years, well, that sets it outside of Cheops's reign, so it no longer can be a tomb. And I just find it, I think a lot of us find it really frustrating about just the sheer arrogance of the Egyptologists in just clinging to this view that it was a tomb. And it doesn't really have what we would expect to see. It doesn't really have features that we would expect to see as a tomb. Also, the official narrative up until recently was that the king originally wanted to be buried in the subterranean chamber, and then he changed his mind. So that you had the descending passage going into the subterranean chamber. And he changed his mind. He wanted to be buried higher. So they dug the ascending chamber into the Queen's chamber, and he decided he wanted to be buried higher still. So then they dug up further and created the King's chamber. Bearing in mind all of this is accurate to within 20,000th of an inch or something, like within the thickness of a thumbnail. That's how precisely this pyramid is orientated. So you've got that, and then recently they found these other passageways which lead to nowhere. So, and one of those actually goes higher than the King's chamber. So that theory of him just changing his mind over and over again sort of fell flat on its face. And I tend to, there's quite a few theories in the alternative sector for what the pyramids were used for. And I really like Christopher Dunn's theory of the Giza power plant. Not sure if anybody's familiar with him.
But,
you are?
I'm right there with you. Yeah, absolutely. It's more mechanical than
yes.
a monument for me, anyway.
Very much so, yeah. So, the Egyptians clearly had quite a high sacred science, which I'll get into after the pyramids, if you like, a little bit. But they sort of had a unified science which encompassed, physics, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, geometry, music, mathematics, art, architecture. So they basically had like this all-encompassing view that was very sophisticated, and there's several features in the pyramid that suggest it was mechanical and that it was used as a source of generating power. So Christopher Dunn, for anybody who's not familiar with his theory, he says that the Queen's chamber basically was for creating, which is made of granite, I believe, was for creating hydrogen by combining, and there's a foul odour in the Queen's chamber, and there's also salt coating the walls up to 1 inch thick. And so just keeping that in mind, he believes that it was to create hydrogen in that chamber by combining two chemicals, hydrated zinc chloride and dilute hydrochloric acid solution, and they combined in the Queen's chamber, boiled off the hydrogen, and this caused leaching of the salts, which in turn became a drying agent for the hydrogen. The hydrogen gas would then give up its moisture, and it would purify by passing along the horizontal passage and into the grand gallery. And at this point, the shafts, the north and south facing shafts, one of them, I believe, opens out to the open air, and what he believes happened was they were harnessing the background radiation of the universe, or that carrier signal, which we believe
one of those little shafts, actually, I think the measurement, the diameter of the shaft is equal to the actual wavelength.
Of hydrogen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the wavelength. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and it's got like this sort of bulbous, like microwave horn as well, where it's collecting that background radiation from the universe. So that becomes so that then mixes with the hydrogen in the Grand Gallery, and if on the roof of the Grand Gallery there's 27 pairs of like these grooves where he believes there used to be these resonator banks that would then emit a frequency, which would then, sorry, this is very complicated
No,
stuff.
it's hold
so
that thought, hold that thought, Jess, because we're right on the break. But Giza power plant, we'll pick it up on the other side. Don't go anywhere, folks. We will be right back. Oh, absolutely, and we'll pick that up on the other side when we come back. And what I'll do now, guys, I'll just going to play a couple of super chats that we had coming in throughout the show so far. So, let's see. We've got our friend Lothar here, so we know it's going to be Masonic. Yay!
The home of the Freemasons.
Ah, yes. They knew a thing or two about building things, that's for sure. And then we have our next one here from Susie as well.
Big love, stay safe at the Kev Baker Show.
Thank you, Susie. And guys, talking to you here, the whole world has changed, obviously. This has been said time and time again. But, coming from an archaeological standpoint, digs around the world, projects that were set to take place, all of that put on hold. There's so many things that have been affected by this. And, the sooner we get back to normal, the better, eh?
Yeah, I think we're all pretty much in survival mode at the moment. So things like archaeology have sort of taken a bit of a back seat.
Toilet roll comes first, Jess. Toilet roll comes first.
Well, I love some of those right now because I can't find any anywhere.
Oh, send Jess your toilet roll. I know you people out there, you're hoarding it.
Release my address for anyone that wants to send me some toilet paper. That'd be greatly appreciated.
You got plenty of toilet paper, Bruce? You all right where you are, yes?
That's the new currency now. The pound has lost its value. All you need is toilet rolls, and you can trade and barter those now for anything.
Well, I tell you, if the money markets keep going the way they are, who honestly knows? We might well end up down
It'll all be in the toilet, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's every day is like a new adventure. Like we were saying before the show, it's a brave new world that we are in now.
Yeah.
Big time.
It's going to be, it's going to be strange times ahead. I mean, look, because I spent years and years writing about the 2012 Mayan calendar or something. In my head, I suppose I've been used to the idea that we're going to be going through some really strange, reset type events. So I can't say I'm as shocked as the average person that something like this has come along.
Do you think the 2012 thing? Do you think that was more a process as opposed to an instant change in things? It would take some time for us to go through.
I do, yeah. I think it's a process, but I do think as well that there is a big event attached to it. But let's just say that I'd say if you're trying to track it over thousands of years. Let's just say if you don't pinpoint it to the day, but you get it by a few years out, that's not bad going,
Absolutely.
So I think that we're in that period that they were looking at. Let's say that they were looking for a period of change, and we're in it. There's still some big events to go.
I think we were the ones that were wrong, because we've got the Gregorian calendar and we tried to extrapolate and kind of line it up, and we know the date. I think the Mayans were spot on. I think it was our interpretation of that 2012 thing that was a bit
things
skewed.
Have been going stranger and stranger since 2012, to be honest. I mean, if I look at the things that have gone on, I mean, it has been a weirder world by far. I mean, it's been a cascade of strange stuff the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, and it definitely did. The world changed back in 2001, honestly. But you're right. It seems to be escalating. And since 2012, you look back there, it seems so long ago now. So much has changed, and more and more and more that change is happening every day now.
I think we've still got more to come. As a friend said, I don't think all of this that's being done now is just about the virus. I think that there's more in the background that they're aware of that's coming down the pipe. This is some sort of dry run for bigger events.
Here we go, guys. Here we go. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2 on today's Kev Baker Show. And what a show this has been so far. It's like a guilty pleasure having these two wonderful people on. I have got author and researcher Bruce Fenton, and we've got our very own Mammoth Girl. Yes, well, Mammoth Hunter from the chat room, not a Mammoth Girl. She's Jessica Knigge. She's coming to us from all the way down under. I'm coming back to you, Jess. because you were getting into one of my favourite kind of series on the pyramid there just before the break, the Giza power plant. I sometimes let my imagination run wild. I try and take my mind back to what it was like there. And I just envisage something like akin to what Tesla was doing, only with the pyramid and maybe obelisks acting as antennas. I don't know, but I definitely think that there's something mechanical going on there. And the Egyptian people, highly scientific from everything I've looked at in the past. And I know you want to touch on that as well before we bring Bruce in with his thoughts on the pyramids, and then we can go to South America where he's seen them as well. So back to you, Jess, on the pyramids.
Cool. So this hydrogen, which is created in the Queen's Chamber, is driven to higher states of energy, higher energy states, through the introduction of sound from these resonator banks, which would have been present in the Grand Gallery. And so it makes its way into the King's Chamber. Now, in the King's Chamber, that's also granite, and there are 5 layers above it of granite, and that the official narrative is that these are to relieve pressure, and also because the king wanted a flat roof. But they're not actually; they're only holding themselves up, so they're not relieving pressure in the structure at all. So what Christopher Dunn reckons is that once this energy then enters into the King's Chamber, the layers of beams start to respond to the energy, and they start emitting their own energy, their own frequency, and that energy is driven to higher and higher state. And even the piezoelectric qualities of granite would come into play with this as well.
Yeah.
And so it would be reaching quite a very high frequency, a very high electromagnetic frequency at this point. And so it's his theory that this was used, as an energy source. It
Jess,
was very finely tuned to this energy. So
let me ask you then, Jess, do you think the Egyptians built it, or do you think it was already there and they done it up again? That they kind of refurbished it, if you want to put it that way?
I think that the pyramid is a lot more ancient than what we're led to believe it is. But I also think that Egypt itself is a lot more ancient than what we've led to believe as well. The Egyptians themselves, it's the height of arrogance, really, that we Western academics say we know more about Egypt than Egyptians do, but they themselves said that they were ruled by divine and semi-divine beings for really long periods of time, like thousands of years, and that's all in their writings, and it's recorded. So, I mean, do we believe that? I don't know. Is it true? I think it is. I think that the Egyptian civilization is much older than we're led to believe, and that it spanned a time where we were a lot more enlightened scientifically and spiritually. That's my opinion.
So then, let me come to you, Bruce. Your take on the pyramids, where do you come in with them? Muted up, sir, muted up. There he is.
Sorry,
I thought Boris Johnson had said you're really naughty for your toilet
no
roll
more
jokes.
talking.
No.
That's it. Be quiet. Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear. It's just a tomb, isn't it?
Yeah. Just a simple tomb. Yeah, exactly. The most elaborate tomb in the world.
What really fascinates me is particularly is the King's Chamber and the sonic resonance, the frequencies that we have there, that the fact that it's been designed to resonate at a specific frequency of sound, right? And that if you make that sound in there, use an instrument or something that you can keep the vibration going, it builds up and it forms a standing wave. And now, I know from a friend who's done an experiment in that chamber that if you can do that and you can keep that wave building, it actually takes you into an altered state. The idea is you lie in the sarcophagus, which obviously you're showing there. Now, someone else would be responsible for making the correct sound. Now, maybe with an instrument or with the voice, they have to keep it going for a while. That will build up to an acoustic, a sonic wave in the room, and you are literally taken into an altered state of consciousness. Now, one of the funny things about the frequency it resonates with is actually relates to the Schumann frequencies, the standing waves of the Schumann field around the Earth, right? Which is really mind-bending. So you've got to think, hang on a minute. So these guys, they know about the Earth's geomagnetic fields, the Schumann waves. They can design a room that allows for the building up of standing waves of sonic frequencies. I mean, you start getting into, hang on a minute. I thought these were just a few people that just know how to sling a few rocks on top of each other, and it's like it's very clear that they have a scientific understanding which is extremely advanced for the time. Beyond anything imagining that we would think. I also believe that what happens is once you're in that altered state, that you are being linked into the Earth's fields itself. Now, I used to work for a guy who's a geophysicist, right? And he points out that it seems that when you're asleep, your brain goes into a kind of resonance with the Earth's fields. Right, that's pretty weird. So when you're asleep and you're dreaming, you go into a kind of harmony with these Schumann standing waves, right? He felt that you could be having some kind of transfer of information between the magnetic fields and your brain. Now, that does sound woo-woo, but keep in mind, I'm talking about a geophysicist here. I'm not saying that's something I just came up with. Now, if you remember, we used to use magnetic fields to record information. We used to use tapes. Right, so the idea of information in magnetic fields is not new, or that you can record to them. So could it be that there was a way to interact and retrieve information from the very fields of the Earth? Are they storing information from us that is downloaded and uploaded as we're asleep? Right, now that starts to sound wacky, but imagine if there is an element of everyone that's ever lived recorded in those fields. There is some information from them, and that you can tune into it deliberately and access that field, almost like an akashic record. If we go to sort of spiritual terms, that if you put someone in that sarcophagus, play the right sound, put them into the trance, that they will connect with that information. Now that would make it the world's most amazing data harvesting, technology.
Well, Bruce, on our network here, Chris and Cherie Geo, they have a show Beyond the Veil. And they went to the pyramid and they got very special access, and they were in the King's Chamber, and they took ayahuasca and actually went into the device. That's what I'm going to call it. Okay. They lay in the device, and they played shamanic type music to get that frequency going. I would definitely recommend you look at their videos. They went to the subterranean level as well. And because it's shot in 4K, Bruce, you can see the crystal kind of coming through in the rock down there, which of course would add to this piezoelectricity effect that we're talking about. And even in my mind with, that kind of thing, the rock itself could contain these memories. The rock itself could be actually the medium back in the day that was downloading and storing what you're talking about when it's tuning into that Schumann resonance,
Well, silica, we know also is used for storing information. And one of the most prized rocks for sacred objects was like the red sandstone, particularly now, which is almost entirely silica crystal. I mean, so you have to wonder again, is this to do with the idea of storing and retrieving information, utilizing silica in the way that today we use it? I mean, I think that's something that we underestimate. Again, with we've got legends of crystal skulls, we've got all of this stuff about the idea that crystal was once used as an information storage medium. And I think that is, it's quite possible that we're seeing that linked in here in Egypt with the reverence for the red sandstone artifacts and stuff, that we may well, be using that in some way to store or access information. So, there's a lot of elements.
It's possible that life itself is going in that direction as well, of becoming composed of silica and moving away from a carbon-based existence, which is sort of how it's heading now with technology and transhumanism and things like that. Yeah. But I just wanted to add to the basically what you were talking about there with Akashic records and all of that, but it could be an initiation chamber as well. I've heard that theory that because it was aligned with Orion and Sirius, that a pharaoh would have access to that, and he would lay there and actually receive stellar energy into the third eye. This is a theory put forward by John Anthony West, who references another guy's work I'll talk about in a little bit. But it could be, Egyptians, people think they were death obsessed, but they were actually quite the opposite. They were obsessed with immortality and attaining immortality. And it's been said by some that the pyramid is actually a vehicle or a stargate, a way of reaching those higher levels of dimensions or consciousness. So I just wondered if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, on two different points there. I would say on one side of it, there's a lady called Joan Grant who wrote a series of books based on her past life memories. Now, when she first wrote the books, she didn't claim that that's what they were. She just wrote them as stories. They became very, very popular. And many years later, she admitted that for her, they were biographical accounts of past lives. Right. Now, in those, she talks about the initiation of winged pharaohs and how they got their wings. And part of the initiation process was that they would be sealed inside the sarcophagus, completely airtight sealed, and then your years of training in the temples would come into play, because you would have to go into an altered state. You'd have to shut down your normal breathing and functions and leave the body. If you didn't do it, you died. That was it. That was the initiation. You either came out as a winged pharaoh, twice born, or you died in there and were buried. That was it. So that was the ultimate test to become a winged pharaoh. So you were both a ruler and a priest king at that point. Now, that's quite amazing as well. When you think about that sarcophagus, that, what a place to initiate the pharaoh, right? In the top of there, in the machine itself, that's where they'd have been taken for their initiation, for their life of death ritual and rebirth. Now, on another, sorry.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say as well is that my wife actually has had, years ago, she's had sort of dream type, abstract dream type experiences. And so she used to be in that chamber. She didn't know at first what it was, and she realized later on. She was in that chamber looking up at these little channels, these little holes in the sides, and knowing she was supposed to go through these things and thinking, well, I can't possibly. They're too thin. How am I going to get my body through? And then realizing she wasn't in her body, that she was dead and had to travel through one of these little holes and out of the pyramid. And obviously, she didn't know anything about it at the time. It was many, many years ago. But only now, of course, we realize that, it does seem that there was supposed to be some sort of soul travel from the machine to somewhere out in the cosmos, And so it's kind of funny that, she's had her own kind of strange experiences with that scenario.
Yeah, so it seems almost quite a multifaceted device, if you will.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the measurements as well of the pyramid, you've got a lot of high mathematics encoded into it, such as pi, the golden number, by multiplying, or I think it's dividing, a couple of the dimensions you get. I'm not sure exactly which ones because it gets quite complicated. I don't have a very good head for maths. But there's also the speed of light encoded as well into it. And, one of these things might be coincidence, but to have all of them in this one structure is, mainstream Egyptologists claim that it's all just by chance, by coincidence, and that's just how the shape was naturally, the most stable or whatever it is. So it's just, that's another interesting fact.
I was just going to say on what you're saying, the fact it does, I think the key there is that, it's multifaceted. It does a lot. And I could imagine, if you were to take yourself back then to when it was built, and say a foreign dignitary arrives, meets with the pharaoh and says, so what does it do? Bear in mind, this is their crowning achievement of a high civilization. So, what does it do? and then proudly saying, what doesn't it do?
Yeah.
Because it does so many different things. It's the crowning achievement of all their knowledge. It does multiple things. You don't build on that scale just because of, for one, it just does this. No, it does. There's different parts of it doing all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and another theory that Christopher Dunn puts forward is if you take into consideration the precession of the equinoxes, and Kev, you've done shows on this recently about how we were in higher states of consciousness, and that's cyclical. So another theory I've heard is that the pyramid was a way of preserving that higher knowledge and that higher level of consciousness. And Christopher Dunn himself thinks that not only was the pyramid giving free energy to the civilization, but also that it may have been keeping them in a higher state of consciousness as they naturally descended in consciousness at the turn of the last golden age. So I found that to be a really interesting, that's obviously not able to be backed up or verified by fact, but it would be an interesting, another application, I suppose, of the pyramid.
Absolutely. And, Bruce, you've travelled around the world, 6 continents. Why is it we see this pyramid here, there, and everywhere?
Yeah, again, I think that Firstly, you've got a lot of shared knowledge at the root. I know that a lot of the archaeologists don't like the idea of cultural diffusionism, right? The idea that information has possibly flowed between different cultures. Now, I think that in some cases that is the case, that you've got a core root where the information has been carried by oceanic travelers, that knowledge is shared. But there also is the argument that we are humans, we have similar drives, we have similar spiritual needs, and that we will encounter some of the same phenomena and experiences in different places. So I don't say it has to be that every time we see a pyramid it's somebody copied somebody else, right? Because of course it can be that a culture comes up with that structure through their own processes of building and realizes that, it's a particularly strong weathering structure and all the rest of it, and has their own reasons. And indeed, the pyramid, if we look at the Egyptian pyramid, it's not the same as a flat-topped pyramid from, say, Mesopotamia or the Mayans. They're not identical, And so we have to be wary of saying, look, they copied each other, because if they were total copies, they would look the same, right? So we know that there is some subtle differences here, but yes, we're dealing usually with the 4-sided basic structure, at least at the bottom part, right? But the Egyptian pyramids are somewhat different in being pointed at the top, unlike Sumeria and unlike Mesoamerica.
Absolutely.
The entire sorry.
No, on you go, Jess. On you go.
I was just going to say another application of the pyramid, and not just the pyramid, but the entire Giza plateau, is actually one of, again, an astronomical clock. If you track where the Sphinx's eyes hit on the horizon, you can, with the 4 sides of the pyramid facing the 4 constellations of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Pisces, and it basically tracks one star from each of those constellations, and you can see it when it does a full loop. It supposedly tells about cataclysms coming and all the rest of it. It's quite complex, but it's definitely worth looking into, because that's another area that's been researched and found to be quite intriguing. The Sphinx itself is some form of astronomical device. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that theory in particular. Yeah,
what do you make of the Sphinx then, Bruce? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I do tend to favour the astronomical connection, that it, representing the age of Leo, and that its gaze on the horizon is indicating to us, something. I've recently been told, I've heard that there is some kind of connection with the sky as it will be in 2016, and that potentially marking something that's coming in late 2016. Now, I don't know how substantial that is. I'm not familiar with the astronomical software and all that side of things, to be honest. But I have heard that a few places that supposedly it may be indicating something in the next few years. Which I mean, I guess
So,
2
so
weeks
do you
ago,
mean
people might have said,
do you
that's
mean
bonkers.
2026 or?
Sorry, 2026. Yeah.
I thought we had time traveled already there. I thought,
Sorry. Yeah.
this is a bad
Lost time.
Mandela effect. I thought we were in 2020. Where am
Yeah,
I? When
no,
am I?
but right now, I wouldn't be shocked if suddenly someone said, "Oh, by the way, actually, it is 2000."
So Bruce, see, the building of these monuments, these temples, these pyramids. I mean, where does the knowledge for that come? The technology, where does that come from? Because I know after the break, I want us to segue into the potential for, some outside interference, stuff like that. Maybe some passing of knowledge between, I don't know, extraterrestrials and humans. Is that where maybe we could see the technology, the information, the knowledge that people like the Egyptians had? It had to have come from somewhere, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you've got a combination. You've got ancestral knowledge handed down from past civilizations, but I think that all the while, humans have always said, that we're in contact with other intelligences, and by that, not necessarily always physical landings, but we've always had people that say, that in terms of shamanic experiences, that they are interacting with intelligences that share actionable intelligence. Now, we know even in modern times, when there's cases of, scientists and mathematicians and stuff who say they've been given like sort of downloads of information that they've used in formulas in their science, inspired designs and things like that. So there is a long history of that kind of contact. And I think that we also have that going on the whole time, that some of the ideas that come up are put into people's minds by intelligences that are not necessarily physical, but can be, but they're, perhaps interdimensional, otherworldly, and that some of these ideas are being given to us. But I also think that there is an older culture that, as I say, we go back down to Sunda and Sahul and the pre-flood times in that Oceanian region, that you've got a civilization going back at least 12,000, well, over 12,000 years, because it was there before that, probably 20,000 odd, right? So they obviously developed a lot of interesting stuff, which they moved with them to Mesopotamia and elsewhere. So there would be a lost curve of development in their understanding, because the only prototypes would have been probably lost in the sea down in that region, right? There may be some early examples of pyramid-like structures and stuff. They're under the sea there.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot yet to be discovered offshore. Graham Hancock, some of his stuff, it's just mesmerizing when you get into some of that. And of course, I know that Graham wrote the foreword for your book, and he does a lot of work on these ancient civilizations and our hidden history, basically. So I would love to, I don't think we'll ever get it, but it'd be interesting to see, a map of the world with all of the oceans drained, just to see, a snapshot of just what was down there. And even then, probably below that, layers below that, there might even be other remnants of civilizations. Who knows how many times we've done this, guys?
There's been lots of time, there's the Silurian hypothesis, which is a paper which discusses the idea of potentially very, very ancient civilizations. What would be left? They really come to a conclusion of, it's technically nothing. You might see a
stone
signature,
and bone, and that's about it.
Yeah, you're not going to have their car rusting away still now. There's not going to be much left to find. So you say if someone lived, I don't know, a million years ago, that there was some kind of high civilization, not necessarily of humans, obviously, but of something here that was intelligent. Whatever it did would have been gone by now. You might notice a chemical change in a layer somewhere and say, hey, that looks almost like someone was running an industry, a million years ago. But you'd never be able to say it definitely was. You just think, well, that's a strange layer, to find. So it's difficult. It is really difficult to validate.
And when we come back after the break, will be the final segment, and we'll get into more of this ancient alien type information. But Bruce, let people know once again where they can find your website, the book, and new book coming out soon, is there?
Yep. So yeah, they keep an eye on hybridhumans.net. There's a few articles on there, and I'll also be putting, well, the book ad is on there. I'll be putting a page about the book on there. Obviously, that will also be on Amazon. It has its own Amazon page. People can check out. There's some of the content is shared there already by the publisher on the Amazon's homepage. They can also look at my work on ancientnews.net, which is more about archaeology, down to earth stuff. And I say Twitter, good place to find me, Exogenesis HH on there. And of course, I'm on Facebook as well.
Exogenesis, hybrid humans. Wow. Now, isn't that something up the Kev Baker Show alley? We'll be back right after these messages. Don't go anywhere, folks. You're listening to TFRlive.com. There we go. There we go. And we've got one segment to go, so when we come back, we'll pick it up on the other side. We'll get into some of the ancient alien stuff, all that good woo. But guys, what are you doing to pass the time at home right now? Any good books or anything you recommend for the audience out there? Documentaries, you know?
Yeah, well, I've been listening to The Case Against Reality, which is a really brilliant book, very popular at the moment. It technically explains that through evolutionary history, the human mind has evolved not to see reality as it is, but to see reality in a way that helps with us continuing, you know, reproduction, health, acquiring the things we need, which means that we get a very warped view of what's actually around us. And it goes into a lot of detail in that, which makes you realize we're not perceiving the world as it is, just the way it suits us.
Oh, I like that. And is that on Audible, yeah?
It is on Audible, yeah. I've been listening to it on there. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
it's
I do
really
like it. I do like listening to the kind of audio versions. What about you, Jess? You read anything, watched anything good?
Not really. I've just been doing a lot of study leading up to this. And I wondered if I could speak quickly about some of the temples in Egypt when we get back from the break, just before Bruce, because, some of the information I've come across is pretty fascinating. But no, I've got the kids to keep me busy. I've got them home from school at the moment. I'm still working a couple of days a week, thank goodness.
Now are the kids
and apart from that, just going through cupboards and drawers and doing all that stuff that you never get around to doing. So
are the kids enjoying this prolonged period at home, or are they enjoying being under your feet?
The first few days they were really enjoying playing PlayStation on the couch and staying in their pajamas till midday, but I think that novelty's worn off now, so they've created their own little routine, which is pretty cute. So we're doing a bit of homeschooling and keeping them busy and keeping them in a routine. So
and adults are going to be like that as well, you know. Bruce, you think about it, you know, cabin fever is going to kick in soon. First few days not working, novelty then soon wears off, and I tell you, a couple of weeks into this, I really do. Who knows what might be happening?
There's a lot of people that. Yeah.
Sorry, only go, Bruce.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of people that don't spend a lot of time with their families normally, and that they don't necessarily like to. You know, there's going to be issues with people, you know, blowing up a bit, I think, and also people having, you know, breakups and meltdowns, and you're going to have all sorts because, most people don't spend all, 24/7 with their partner and kids. And, you know, I do, I mean, because the way my life's structured, but most don't.
No, you're very right. There's going to be a baby boom 9 months from now, and there's also a pile of divorces on the other side as well. Yeah, absolutely. But we'll be back in a little moment. But I want to thank everyone again for tuning in today. And I think somebody came in with a sticker, so I think that plays a little thank you on here. I think it does. It might do. Hang on, I'll try again. Can't even work my own show. There we go. Thank you, Yeshua, Messiah, Jesus. There you go. Thank you very much. So it's not very often I can say that you've had somebody like Jesus tipping the show, but yep, I'll definitely take that. So then, when we come back, I'll come to you first then, Jess, okay? I want to hear what you've got to say about these temples, and then I'll come to you, Bruce, and we'll get into aliens and genetics and hybrids and Anunnakis and wherever you want to go. Look, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I'm going to get interrogated after the break here. Here we go. I'm going to bring it back, guys. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Only one segment to go on today's show with Bruce Fenton and Jessica Knigge. And we've been talking about all things ancient, lost civilizations, the technology they may have had, the pyramid, what it was really all about. And Jess, I know you want to touch on some of the temples in Egypt as well, right?
Yes, yeah, I do indeed. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Egyptian culture is not actually death obsessed; it's obsessed with immortality, and it had a very sort of overarching view of science, and it was So. Sorry, basically, John Anthony West's work, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with him. He died a couple of years ago, but brilliant guy, and so eloquently spoken and great to listen to. But he references a guy's work named Shrowler Galuvic, very hard name to sort of pronounce. And this guy lived between the 1890s and the 1960s. And he was a practicing alchemist, among other things, but he spent 10 years at the Temple of Luxor, just studying it and trying to figure out, what, if anything, these Egyptians were into and how it all worked, how their cosmology worked and tied into their science and all the rest of it. So he basically found that the temple itself contained a catalogue of sort of occult laws, archetypal forces, sacred geometries, and he unpacked these and found that the temple itself was an expression of the human body as well as the universe. So it was an expression of from microcosm to macrocosm, as above, so below. And it shows basically that both man and the universe are governed by the same principles. And each symbol would have a meaning to the initiate, and even people that aren't initiated and don't understand what they're looking at are just in awe when they walk into these temples, because subconsciously their subconscious is aware of how rich this information is. And the structure itself he called four-dimensional, because all living things have sort of three phases where they're born and they grow and then they sort of change, not necessarily die, but just change form. And basically this temple itself was a living structure in the fact that it was constructed according to the Fibonacci sequence, just as all living things are, and each pharaoh contributed to it over a 500-year period. So the fourth dimension, I'll go back to that, being that this expansion over time. And so each pharaoh added to this temple in the Fibonacci sequence, and so it was actually a living structure that enshrined the laws of the universe within it. So very, very deep and intense meaning of these temples, so probably more so than what we understood. And John Anthony West actually says that this guy, I'll quote him directly actually, and he says that his work is a vast and magisterial reinterpretation of Egyptian doctrine. And his doctrine is known as the man-cosmos or anthropo-cosmos. And each temple is there to teach a different cosmic principle. And this particular temple at Luxor is to teach the principle of as above, so below, and the man-cosmos theory. So, I found that really interesting. They also believed that there were two ways you could go, the Osiris route or the Horus route. And the Osiris route meant reincarnating again on Earth, but for the initiates and people that had access to this priest class of information, there was another route, and that was the route of Horus, being that you could actually become a star and become immortal and go on to raise your consciousness up to another level within that universal matrix, and that you could indeed, because they believe, unlike our science, which doesn't really include consciousness in the mix, consciousness was the basis of their science. So they had quite, intricate geometry and mathematics conveyed in these temples, and it's just really fascinating view on a different view on their religion and how they viewed life, basically. So yeah.
Yeah,
That's all I have to say about that.
You think about that, Jess, and I'll come to you, Bruce, as well. I mean, the level of knowledge to be encoding so many things into a building, that for me is where we do get into the realms of where on earth did that information come from, or possibly not from Earth. And I'm going to come to you, Bruce, because I want to see now, how you think perhaps aliens may tie into any of this ancient story of ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely, I think that, most of the ancient cultures, we'll go with the Egyptians, but most of the ancient cultures, they talk about that connection, and in the temples we have representations of beings that are definitely not human, that are part of this story, and that particularly with the Egyptians, we have things like the Netas who manifest from another reality. Supposedly, I think they manifest first at Abu Ghurab, which is not far from the Giza plateau, and that these are non-human beings that are directly interfacing, and of course we have like the 9 gods and stuff with their non-human features, often bird heads, so there's very clear representations and lore about non-humans that that are right there in the middle of the story, and are often conveying the wisdom that is encoded into temples and into the pyramids and stuff. That if we look to see where does some of this information come from, they often tell you direct, that it's coming from these beings. Now, whether they call them gods or whether they are just not very clearly in the information, not human beings. That's definitely right there. So I think, we have probably interdimensional elements and extraterrestrial elements, now, which I suppose in some respects both are alien, right? They're alien to our normal human world.
Yep.
But they're just different. They're different in whether or not they're physically tangible or not physically tangible.
No, absolutely. And, we hear a lot about then the Anunnaki and things like that. And last time when you were on, we were talking about genetics and, the genetics of what's found in Africa and things like that. Where do you come in on that whole kind of Anunnaki, the Sitchin kind of idea, where you had these entities coming down here, playing jiggery pokery with some of the DNA to create us in our form today? What do you think of that?
Well, I particularly like the work of a researcher called Leonard Farah. Now, I don't know if you know his work,
no,
but he's
not heard that one.
3 books on the Pleiades legacy. Pleiades in the Old World, Pleiades New World, Pleiades in the Stone Age, I think it's. Now, he tackles some of the same, if you like, the symbolism and some of the lore and stuff from Sumeria in one of his books. Now, I think he's more accurate, quite honestly, than Sitchin's work, so I would definitely flag it up to everyone who's interested. Now, he points out that an awful lot of the iconography and stuff is highlighting the Pleiades, right? And the 7. You have these 7 wise beings. Indeed, there's in the sky, there's these 7 what seems like craft that are associated with the cataclysm. There's all sorts of stuff in there which keeps flagging it up as there's a contact event underway with these beings from the Pleiades. Now, there's also seems to be representations of some very reptilian looking beings in some of the Sumerian art, right? So I think we have at least a couple of different contact events overlapping. Now, I think Sitchin also, obviously, he's delved into that area. I just think, to be honest, that Farah's a bit better. But essentially what you find in there is, a clear case of recorded contact. Now, I don't expect the sort of stone tablets and stuff to be as accurate as a tape recorder. We've got to be sort of realistic and say that, okay, well, they're not going to, it's not like we've got the video camera and we can watch what they saw. So we have to be careful when we get to interpreting, right? And also, to what degree do we accept that they will give us a 100% factual, accurate history. I think that's unlikely. We're going to get a bit of Chinese whispers, but I think the core story that they were visited, that they had direct interactions, that there's a link to the Pleiades, there's also a link to these other kind of more reptilian-like beings. I think these are the core parts of the story, which I think, again, you see replicated, not just in Sumeria, but elsewhere around the world. So many sites have a connection with the Pleiades. I think an unbelievable number of sites, really, in different nations. And on top of that, the themes of reptilian-type entities, that's another universal theme. So I think what we see in many of these cultures is a record of real events. That's something that happened probably 5,000 odd years ago in that case, but there's also happened previous to that. You have some of these legends about the Atlantis type story, that supposedly there were beings on the earth connected with that as well, that that they've been here, interact with us at various times in various places. Now, the genetic engineering side, when Sitchin wrote his books, obviously there wasn't a lot of the genetic information, certainly not what we have now. I mean, he didn't really, from what I understand, I've read some of his work. I've not read all of his books, right? But I'm not, to my knowledge, he doesn't actually provide what we would call detailed genetic information. He just sort of says that he believes that around 400,000 years ago, Homo erectus was modified to create these more modern humans to be sort of slave workers. But to my knowledge, he doesn't provide any genetic evidence. Okay, I mean, maybe you correct me if I'm wrong. I've never seen it.
No,
I mean,
you're right.
No. All right, so the difference is now we can actually bring up the genomic studies and see, is there anything that's really gone on? And that's part of what I've done, obviously. And what you find is that the clearest signatures of engineering events go back to around about 780,000 years ago, not 400. So however he came to that date from the tablets or from however he translated it, I would just say that doesn't take you to a time when there's anything particularly anomalous going on, right? Because now we have the full genome mapped. So what you find instead is there's something very, very weird going on about 780,000 years ago. That you have the fusion of chromosome 2, you have a whole load of brain genes that are kind of anomalous, some of them that appear out of nowhere, out of the non-coding DNA. They just form, magically form.
Just random, just random chance, Bruce.
Pop out of nowhere, right? And then you have others that seem to be small snippets of longer genes, right? Which is something obviously we're doing now with CRISPR, Cas9, all these gene drives and stuff, right? You find that they say that, this brain gene seems to be just a small fragment of another longer gene that's been cut out, replicated, and put back in. In fact, in the wording, it actually says it looks almost like it was Xeroxed. You sort of think when you read that in an academic paper and they say words like that, looks like it's Xeroxed. You can't help but think the scientists are thinking, what the hell is going on here?
And I do say there's nothing new under the sun. We think we're highly advanced, but like you said there, almost Xeroxed in a bit of DNA. I mean, that's CRISPR-Cas9 in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's it. We've come around to the point where we can recognize the fingerprints of the gods, put it that way, right? Whereas, obviously Graham Hancock touches on them in terms of their building technology. Now we can touch on them in terms of their genetic engineering capabilities and other high technologies that that have been used in the past. Because we wouldn't have been able to recognize it. There's a lot of things going on right now. Look, I think we're at the end of a cycle.
Uh-oh. Jess,
right.
There we go.
You're finding
got
the
me?
to validate
Yeah.
the myths. Isn't it funny that just in the last few years, not only we've suddenly got the technology to find the signatures we've done, but we've also got things like we found the evidence of the comet that hit 12,000 years ago. They found the crater up in the north, which seems to be the crater, a 12,000-year-old crater. Like all the things that are validating these stories are all appearing at the end of the cycle. You take it like the revelation, which, or if you're in ufology, the disclosure, it's just the words mean the same thing. Everyone's waiting for revelation or disclosure or something. And at the end of the cycle, you always get the story. That's the way it works. You get this thing and then it resets, right? And we're getting all this stuff that can now prove things that before we would not have been able to know. We couldn't have looked at the genome. We couldn't have understand when this happened. We wouldn't have recognized the CRISPR type engineering. All these things that only now can we start to get the full picture and put it together. And that's what's happening.
sorry to interject there, but I'd just like to add that, the same sort of thing with high mathematics and physics and even quantum physics, which is, present in the Dogon symbology, and Laird Scranton's work on that is pretty fascinating, that only recently have we discovered that that's what a lot of these symbols mean, are, things to do with quantum physics and string theory and wave formations and stuff like that. All that advanced knowledge was encoded in their symbology, which is a lot easier way to sort of remember it and look at it. But yeah, I just thought I'd add that in there.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's across lots of topic areas. It is. It's across lots of topic areas where we start to realise, things that we, again, like cyclical time, the idea of cyclical time. Now that's starting to come out of the world of physics. They're saying maybe there was no start. Maybe it was just a cyclical process. It's like, well, where have we heard that before? I mean, Christ, every civilization and culture pretty much of the ancient world told us it was a cyclical time, right? And now we have the physicists saying, well, it turns out, it seems like maybe we had this whole Big Bang starting thing a bit wrong, and maybe it's just a cycle of time, or and also the theory of expansions and contractions and all this as well. That there's a lot of these models now shifting, and indeed there's how does reality function? They're saying, well, probably waves and vibrations. How long have we heard? It's all about waves and vibrations, and like now the physicists are coming out with this stuff. It's a cyclical reality with waves and vibrations making us all up, and that your sense of smell is quantum waves in the reality. It's not you smelling particles of whatever the thing, all this that we're starting to, we're in a soup of these waves and vibrations, and time is just in our imagination.
So do you think this is what happens every time, Bruce? Do you think?
I do think so, but just in slightly different ways. But I think that each time you hit the end of the cycle, it's like the revelation, the disclosure, and it's I just find it really funny that the people don't really see they're saying the same thing. You'll have people in one group saying, well, we're waiting for disclosure. We're not not like this religious lot. And they're saying, well, we're waiting for revelation. Now, what do those words mean? Oh, the same thing. Right. So we're waiting for
scientists are waiting for confirmation.
Yeah, the confirmations, and everyone's waiting for this thing to fall into place where we get the aha moment. We get it. We get what it's all about, who we are, why we're here, what it's been about, where it's going. The amnesia fades. The Graham Hancock says we're a species with amnesia. I would say at the end of the cycle, the amnesia lifts, and you realise, oh God, it was that, and we were this.
And we're in that moment pretty much right now. We really are. But Bruce, before we go away today, talk to us a little bit about exogenesis, human hybrids. What's that all about then?
I'll give you a little the quick bit. I mean, hopefully we can have a longer chat on that.
Yes,
near the launch time. Basically, it details a number of things. I go into the whole thing about what's going on with the UFO topic. Obviously we've had a sea change in that. We've had, mainstream news suddenly is tackling UFOs. Again, that's a whacked out thing that's been happening in the last few years.
Yeah, I've talked about how they ditched the wacky music and the kind of making fun of it, and it was like a light switch. All of a sudden, it was the most serious thing in
the name of it as well.
The UAPs, and rebranded it so that people can talk about it now. We have that. I discussed that phenomena. I'll talk a bit about SETI and why SETI is not geared up really to look for signals of extraterrestrial intelligence. It is in a way radio waves, which is the most unlikely farcical scenario imaginable. The idea that you can somehow stumble on a radio wave from a civilization that put it this way, you can point your telescope in any one of infinite directions for a start, and then you've got to hope that a radio wave is coming from that point in time at the same time as you choose to do it, and all the rest. You start to realize that the mind-boggling chances of detecting a radio signal, assuming anyone even ever used them out there, is so ridiculous as to make it the most ludicrous method to search for aliens. But it was the one they had. So, okay, so I get it. But SETI is not good for looking for things like, visitation or multi-dimensional intelligences. And so people have to sort of accept that and say, well, they're not going to find the kind of intelligences most of us are talking about, right? Because they're not geared up for it. It's going to take something else. And so I go into what it will take, what the scientists have to do to change to do that. I also, of course, I tackle the core subject we've touched on here, genetics. And I'll go quite deep into that, highlighting specific changes that occurred that mesh with the increase in the cranial capacity around 800,000 years ago. Now, the genetics points to 780,000 for a lot of this stuff. I also tackle a story that comes out of Australia, which is, for anyone who's sort of familiar with Valerie Barrow and her book, the Alteringa, when the first ancestors were created. Now, I came to know about that through my research, first into the site you touched on the beginning of the show, that I was a lost ruin out in the Amazon jungle, and through a long series of connections that led me to Valerie Barrow's work. And I realized that in it there was this story, of a visitation of a large crystalline craft blowing up in orbit. That at the same time there'd been an asteroid bombardment of our planet, and the modification of humans. So I kind of thought, well, can you validate these things, or not? And so it really was a deep dive into that, and I found that I could validate those as real events, right? Which was, to be honest, totally mind-bending, because even if you believe a story like that, you don't necessarily think you'll be able to find any evidence because it's so long ago. I was quite realistic about that. I thought probably, you're not going to find anything, but in which case there wouldn't have been a book, So it was the idea was, if I couldn't find anything, I would just leave it as believing it myself. But there's no point trying to make anyone else believe it. But it's very different if you can go out and you find the debris from the craft, the impact craters from the bombardment, and the anomalies in the genome. Now, so that was a core part of the book.
Wow, I cannot wait to get into that, Bruce. I'm telling you. So, Jess, let me come to you. What's your thoughts on the old alien kind of intervention, assistance, whatever you want to call it, in ancient times?
It's not really my area of expertise, paleoanthropology, but I have done a bit of, recent research on it due to being on the show with Bruce and all things like that. And it is, we don't have that missing link, as a lot of people would be aware. It's still missing. It seems like there was an awfully fast evolution going from ape-like to human-like in quite a short period of time, which doesn't quite fit the whole Darwinian theory of evolution. And he himself said, it's quite well known, he himself said that the theory likely didn't apply to humans because of the fact that there was a missing link. That's not to say that there isn't one. Fossilization process is quite a rare occurrence, and it's got to be a set, things that need to happen for fossils to form. But my personal opinion is that, I think that I'm partial to the panspermia theory myself, where, because the likelihood of life just forming in the primordial soup is just ridiculous. I mean, if you look at the numbers, you'd have to have several books of zeros just to write down all the
astronomical amount of zeros. Exactly.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
It literally is. So, as soon as I read that, and I read that in a what's the Chariot of the Gods guy from Ancient Aliens?
Eric von Daniken.
Yeah.
Eric von Daniken. Yeah, I read that in his book back in 2012, and that really made me realise all of a sudden that, there's just no way that this happened by chance. So, yeah, I do believe that there's some form of directed panspermia that might be going on, and then obviously if left unattended, so to speak, we might have, we probably would have eventually evolved into something similar to what we are today. But because of that, that really quick transition period, it seems to me like there would have definitely had to have been some form of, alteration or a bit of a push maybe from outside influences. That's just my opinion. So.
Yeah. I was going to say,
I'm not really up to scratch with all the genetic lingo and things like that.
There was something you touched on last time we chatted. I don't know if you want to refresh us on it, but you did say that you were told about a story about near Uluru, I think it was, about people that couldn't breathe.
That was a story. that took place near Uluru, and it was some aliens that came down in a craft. They had children. They crash landed. They had children that couldn't adjust, or well, they couldn't either themselves, but they couldn't adjust to the atmosphere and the chemical composition of the water and the parasites and all the rest of it. So they actually took some of the local population and mixed their genetics with them and had children that were better suited to the environment, basically. And I think that ties in so well. Like, I just read your book after that, after I spoke to Luna and came on the show last time. So when I read your book, I was like, oh my goodness, like that is just a perfect match, basically, for what you were saying in your book and the time frame.
Well, guys, we are almost out of time. I cannot thank you enough. We could have probably talked for about another 5 hours. But I need to hand off now to the next show, and I'll be back tomorrow with Freaky Friday. Don't go anywhere. Okay. Now, I'll let you finish that off there, Jess, if you had anything else to say, because I kind of cut you off because the music was coming on. And,
no, that's all right. I was pretty well finished anyway, what I was saying. So hand it over to Bruce to expand on that if he wants.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, because I think it's such a good like lore story, that one, that really ties in so directly with the same information, basically, from the Taringa, which again is from around that region. The Taringas, at least one of these ancient Taringas is from that region. I believe the core one in the story, is from the Uluru area, and that's where it was sent back to.
Sorry, Bruce, and just for people that don't know, sorry to interrupt, but Taringas are very sacred objects, and only men are allowed to look at them, and only initiated men are allowed to be involved with them. So I just thought, because I don't think the general audience would know what a Taringa stone was. So sorry, on you go.
I was lost there, yes. I was one of those people, Jess. Thank you.
Yeah, they're essentially a very, very highly sacred artifact, Aboriginal artifact. But I'll let Bruce tell you about that, because it's his book.
Well, yes, there's some good papers out there. I mean, people can read, where... I mean, obviously, look, the best thing is if you can talk to an elder or someone who will tell you about it. But the second best is there's some papers that have been written by, anthropologists and people that have been out, and they've spoken to elders and got some information on it. And pretty much you're looking at a lore story that goes back to the idea that when the first beings of the Al Taringa time were here, that one of the things they left here were these Taringas, and that the Taringas were living objects, imbued with the consciousness of Al Taringa beings from the dream time, and that they could communicate information, that they were sort of alive, and that, that they are still considered sacred today. They're kept away from the average person. And in fact, I think that some people would say they're kind of dangerous in a way, that people would be a bit scared to be with one anyway, but that they're kept secure and only brought out, for really important moments, and only handled by a highly sort of revered, initiated high elder, and again, usually just a man as well on top of that. So I mean, there's a lot of protocol around them, a lot of control, a lot of importance put on them, reverence put on them, but they do tie back to that time.
And one of the symbols as well that you see quite commonly on the Taringa stones, just to bring it full circle back to Gobekli Tepe again, because that symbol's actually been found there as well, hasn't it, Bruce? That you find on the Taringa stones.
How do you spell that, Jess? Just so I can write that down. How do you spell that word?
Churinga.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, so if we go and take a quick look then, this has been found over in Gobekli Tepe, yeah?
The symbols on them, yeah.
You find from my article where I talk about it, it's on there. I mean, the tricky thing about them is trying to find representations which are not like offensive. I mean, obviously there is artwork which looks
Churinga.
like...
Sorry to interrupt, Kev. It's Churinga. CHUR.
Right, yeah. There we go. How's that? Is that it?
Churinga. So, yeah, just get rid of the NG. Yeah.
There we go.
That's it.
Okay, there we go. And then we come down, we get the images there. Yeah, exactly.
to that symbol that, yeah, also appears on Sharinga stones as well. Some of them, you know.
That's amazing. That truly is. Well, guys, I cannot thank you enough for today. But before I go, I'm just going to play a couple of the... Well, I'm going to play all of the super chats that we've had coming in between the last ones we played. But first up, we have got Susie. And Susie, I think there it is there. Yeah, this one here.
Tonight the nation come together giving thanks to the NHS and those on the front line my community was banging with.
Yeah, that was happening here as well. It was happening in Glasgow. It was the most bizarre thing, but, you know, a big shout out to anyone working on the front line of this right now. I tell you, they're the heroes right now. They really are. So next up, we've got Algorithm.
Appreciate it.
Great
Thank
job,
you.
Jessica Bruce, and of course Kev Baker.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And then we've got
Thanks, Algo.
Thank you.
Artistic.
Great show.
Well, it certainly was. A big thank you to Jess and Bruce for that. And then we have as well, we've got this one.
Awesome lurk, lady and gents. Much love, chat. The pep.
Yeah, Brian loves to lurk and listen, but great to see you here again, Brian. We've got one more here. There we go.
Love this topic. Thank you all.
Ah, Sirius, a very apt name to be chipping into the super chat. Thank you. And, you know, I think most people, guys, it's something in our DNA, I think, that makes topics like we touched on tonight. I'd never come across anyone who says, oh, I hate hearing about all that ancient stuff. It resonates with all of us because I still think that we carry a lot of the information, no, all of the information. They call it junk DNA, but between the ancestral DNA kind of links that we've got and the Akashic records and multiple things that we can't even conceptualize, I think the whole story is contained in all of us, and that's why we love these topics, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, I think it's embedded in us in different, as you say, in different ways, you know, that we can access it in different ways.
Absolutely. What do you think, Jess?
Yeah, definitely. I think that epigenetics, basically, it's all there. It's just about what's expressed and what isn't. You know, and all this knowledge, I think, is subconsciously buried within our DNA.
And tonight we are playing our part, you know, as we move from one cycle into a new one, you know, getting all this information out there. Hopefully we'll retain it over the foreseeable future and carry it into the next cycle. But guys, thank you so much, and I hope we can do this sometime again real soon, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you,
It'd be nice to do it again in, you know, May when the book's about to come out, if that works with you.
We will stay in touch, sir, and we will definitely get that lined up. But folks, thank you all for being here today. I'll be back tomorrow with an extra stream during the daytime. Then we'll have Freaky Friday at night. Stay safe wherever you are. Remember to keep checking the NHS if you're in the UK for all the up-to-date guidelines on how to protect yourself and how to protect others. So until tomorrow, keep your mind open. Keep looking for the woo, but not to the point where your brain turns to black goo.